Revenge of the Black Cloak Society, a King's Quest-based fic. Chapter 5. Witch Stew. Crispin had just finished casting an illumination spell, just as the mysterious darkness consumed the castle. In that moment, with his small area illuminated, he heard a wicked cackle. He knew who it was in a moment. Dahlia had caused the darkness as a cover for an attack. He started to run in the direction he was sure the cackle came from. As he moved, he tried to keep track of where he was in the castle, in the cast area of light. With the darkness came chaos, people panicking, guards trying to protect and calm people. It only made things harder to keep his bearings. When he finally reached where he was sure the wicked cackle came from, fear filled his old body. It was the royal chamber, where both King Graham and Queen Valanice rested. He hoped neither King Graham nor Queen Valanice was in the room, but he was sure one of them was in the room. Even standing at the door, he could feel evil magic radiating from the door. He glanced to see a nearby guard entering the area of illumination. The guard had a worried look on his face.
The king wants to make sure the queen is safe. The historian said she was in the room.
Crispin looked at the door again and shook his head.
I fear that Queen Valanice is in grave danger. We need to get into the room.
Before he could warn the guard, the man grabbed the door handle and was knocked back by a powerful magical spell. Lightning appeared to go through the guard's armor, and he feared the guardsman was dead. He started casting a spell to dispel the evil magic, aware that every second counted. If Dahlia had indeed chosen to kidnap Valanice, it was for a very evil purpose. Something told him that whatever it was, it had to be a very powerful spell. Valanice's homeland of Kalima was richer in magic than Daventry was. As he finished the spell, he heard more guards reach the hall, each amazed at the illumination. He knew that they were stunned by the sight of their fallen comrade, but Crispin reminded them of the real reason they were here.
We need to save Queen Valanice before it's too late.
He watched as they forced the door open, thankful that his spell had worked. His thankfulness turned to despair as he saw the room was empty. He ran inside and quickly went to the window, especially as he noticed the sky was brightening up again. As he looked out, he saw Dahlia flying towards the forest, with a figure floating behind her broom. He had one option left. He quickly cast a tracking spell on Valanice. Given his age and expertise, the spell would be almost unnoticeable. Only a very powerful wizard would be able to detect it. When he was finished, he saw King Graham, Cale Silver, the new historian, and the king's personal guard enter the room. There was a worried look on his face as he asked the important question, "What happened to my wife?" Crispin lowered his head, knowing the news would not be well received.
I fear Dahlia has abducted her, most likely for a very powerful spell.
He heard an agonized cry come from Graham's lips.
However, I was able to place a tracking spell on her. That should lead your guards to her quickly.
He wasn't surprised when Graham nodded and said, "I'm going to lead this attack." In fact, he expected it. He also realized that the king was already planning what to do.
Cale, fetch me one
of the up-to-date maps. Guards, I want you to find the best armor, hopefully one that is magic-proof. If it isn't, Crispin will make sure it is. As the men left the room, Crispin stepped closer to Graham.
Sire, I can set a special spell on the magic shield for you. An absorb and reflection spell that was set on a shield in another land. I was told of a way to temporarily set this spell on any shield. I'm sure that it will come in handy."
He watched as the king nodded. "I'm sure it will. I just hope it doesn't alter the shield in any way. If Dahlia suspects a reflective shield, she might use that knowledge to reflect an attack onto Valenice." Crispin nodded in understanding, and knew what had to be done. Once everything would be together, which he hoped would be soon, he was sure how things were going to play out. Dahlia worked at her cauldron, making sure she would have enough potion ready to do the spell. Normally, the spell wouldn't take long to prepare, and then the process took about an hour to complete. Those hours were usually fun, as the victims screamed as their body died and turned into gingerbread cookies. Usually, one of those screams were frozen on the face when it became a cookie. As she continued working, her prisoner finally spoke. "My husband will stop you. He has told the story of how he defeated you many times, and this will be no different." Dahlia inwardly hated when her prisoners would speak of false hopes. All the talk about rescue ruined her concentration. Those past rescues never happened, but they prolonged the process. She threw the next ingredients into the cauldron and stirred up the concoction. "Once I start the spell, there will be no rescue. No one has ever survived the transformation." She then glanced over at Valenice. "Besides, I'm waiting for your husband to arrive. I'll enjoy watching both of you become cookies, especially after what he did." She cackled again and noticed a look of fear crossing Valenice's face. She was certain that part of that fear was the old-sounding cackle coming from the young body she now had. It had been centuries since she had a body like this, and she was thankful for Shadrach's spell. A young body could do more than an old body, for right now she wouldn't need illusion spells to ruin other kingdoms, like she had with Daventry long ago. In fact, if King Graham had not been alive now, she would have. However, Shadrach wanted the kingdom of Daventry taken care of now. As she went for the last spell's ingredients, she heard Valenice speak again, with a little more fear in her voice. "How exactly did you come back from being dead?" She turned to her captive and smiled a wicked smile. "My spirit never left this building. The spell I had used to slowly consume this kingdom years ago was reflected back on my home. For years, people walked around it and even through it, until Shadrach came to Daventry. He came upon the bandit that operated just outside the borders. He then used him to not only find the place, but to bring the body I now inhabit. He wants full revenge on your family, ruining all the Black Cloak's plans." She noticed the scared look on Valenice's face had intensified, and smiled. "Very soon, Valenice, if your husband can defeat me. My minions will remain. My wolf will roam and devour people. My sorcerer will cast spells to immobilize the people, which will make them easy prey for the wolf. And those who the wolf doesn't kill, my ogre will kill." Now she could tell Valenice was terrified. She could see a slight tremble as the Queen of Daventry stood in the cell. She hadn't told her that the moment she finished the cookie spell would be the moment they remained. She wanted the Queen's last moment alive to be as miserable as possible. Dahlia then just leaned towards the cage. No matter what, Daventry is doomed. She would have continued to gloat, but the sound of a door opening and look of relief on Valenice's face told her that someone had entered. She was sure who it was that had entered, and inwardly cursed when a male voice spoke. "It's over, Dahlia. You will no longer torment my kingdom." Dahlia cackled, enjoying the fear the sound created in Valenice. "You snuck up on me last time, Graham. This time you won't be pushing me into my cauldron." She quickly spun around and cast a ball of lightning at him. She watched as it flew through the air, and he raised a familiar shield. She cackled even louder, thinking how foolish he was. King Graham quickly raised his shield as the ball of lightning came right at him. He knew Crispin had cast a special spell on the magic shield, but he was still unsure how it worked. He then felt something hit the shield, and there was a glow coming from the shield. Something told him the spell did what it was supposed to do when Dahlia stopped cackling. He felt better, since seeing the form of a young woman cackle like an ancient witch was unnerving. It also became clear to him that she didn't understand what had happened. "That should have fried you through that blasted shield. Maybe a stronger blast will do it." He watched as the young-looking witch cast another ball of lightning at him. As before, he felt it hit the shield. When the glowing seemed to intensify, he realized the shield spell was doing what it was supposed to. He took the moment to try and press for more information from Dahlia. Perhaps this is magic the Black Cloak Society doesn't know about. Or does the Black Cloak Society only employ means of harming people? He jumped to the left as a green ball of light came right at him. "The price of power is high, and very few are willing to make the sacrifices. Shadrach knows this all too well. He's killed millions. The latest direct kill was the girl whose body I inhabit. Mind you, her soul lingered for a few days. In fact, it still does linger. How would you feel now, Graham, if you pushed me into the cauldron like you did decades ago, like a coward?" Graham tried to maintain his focus after she brought that up. He had to admit what he did all those years ago was underhanded, but it was the only way to safely be rid of her. If she had seen him in her home, he would have ended up a cookie, and the awful fate that was planned for Daventry would have happened years ago. He brought his mind back to current matters as a fireball flew at him. He moved to the side and lost his footing. The blast missed him, but he fell to the floor almost in a heap as the witch cackled. It was not a good spot to be in, but he was hoping that things would go right, realizing that there was only one unavoidable fact: the definite death of the girl whose body Dahlia was inhabiting. He said the one thing he was sure Dahlia would react to. "I feel sorry for the girl you killed, Dahlia, but I know she'd want to see you perish in the land of Daventry." The response to his statement was an unearthly scream from the witch as she launched another lightning ball at him. He held up the shield, hoping it would work one last time. This time he felt the ball hit, and when the shield pushed back towards him, as he felt a great force launch away from the shield, He heard the witch yelp in surprise. He glanced from behind the shield and saw the witch go flying towards the fireplace and her evil cauldron. At that moment, he knew her evil was over, and maybe the spell she had cast would end. Queen Valenice watched in both horror and relief as Dahlia fell right into the cauldron. While it was an end she wouldn't want to happen to anyone, she remembered what Dahlia was going to do to her. She also realized how ready she was to do that as the witch yelled, "No! All I needed was one more ingredient to affect everyone." With those last words, a horrifying sight began. The witch's clothes went from black to white, like frosting, as her skin changed into gingerbread. Soon the cookie fell apart, leaving bone behind before that too dissolved into the cauldron. When that horrifying sight was over, she breathed a sigh of relief. She then gasped as two shades flew out of the cauldron. The darker one flew around the room, howling before it went out the chimney, as if being pulled by some otherworldly force. The other shade, lighter in color, remained by the cauldron. As it floated there, Valenice opened the cell and wasn't surprised to see it was unlocked. She moved out of the cell and over to the shade, noticing that Graham had gotten up and was by her side. When she was close enough, she realized who the shade had to be. It was the girl who had gone missing just before Dahlia's return. It had to have been her body that was used to house Dahlia's spirit, and now the body was gone. Before she could say anything, the spirit spoke. "King Graham, thank you for freeing me. Now my spirit can rest in peace." Valenice watched as her husband nodded. "You are welcome. I just wished that I could have stopped what happened to you before it happened. I do know that a very dark and old evil magic was used on you, done by a very ancient wizard." After Graham had said that, Valenice was stunned to see the spirit shake her head. Before either of them could ask, the spirit freely answered, "If it was old magic, it wasn't an old wizard who did the spell. The figure I had seen was a young man. I would tell you more, but I must go." Valenice watched as the spirit then disappeared from view. After a moment, Valenice remembered that Dahlia had said to her in the cage. She quickly turned to face her husband with a worried look. "Graham, Dahlia said shortly before you got here that soon, even if she was defeated, her minions would remain. She also confirmed that Shadrach is in Daventry." She saw her husband was about to say something, but was cut off by one of the knights entering. "Your Highness, good news! The wolf and ogre have disappeared, and others say that they saw the sorcerer disappear, along with the giant and the dragon. Is the witch gone?" Valenice watched as her husband nodded. "Yes, she's gone." Soon the place was filled with the sound of a loud crack. She glanced around and noticed that the walls were cracking, and parts were starting to fall apart. Her husband noticed it as well. "Everyone, out of this place! It's coming apart!" She started to run at the same time as her husband. As they were running out of the collapsed building, she noticed something for the first time. Graham had put on his adventuring cap. He had worn that hat every time he was on an adventure, even when he rescued her from the Crystal Tower. She knew there was something lucky about that hat. When they finally stopped, they were in the woods outside Dahlia's home. They turned around just in time to see it collapse. When the crumbs settled, they looked over the area. The only sign that the witch's house had been there were the crumbling remains of her victims from decades ago. After a moment, Valanice looked at her husband. "Do you think it's over?" She watched as he kept staring at the ruins. "No, I fear this was just the beginning." After a moment, she watched her husband turn to one of the guards that must have come with him. "Inform the family whose daughter went missing that she fell victim to Dahlia, and that the witch is dead." As the guard nodded and left, they started to make their way back to the castle. As they made their way, Valanice hoped that her husband was wrong about this just being the beginning. She didn't want more innocent lives, like that of the girl who Dahlia had possessed, being lost. However, something inside her told her he was right, and that worried her even more. Cale Silver sat at the desk in his room in Daventry Castle. On his desk a large map was unrolled. The map, however, wasn't something a historian would use, mainly because in one corner was the insignia of the Black Cloak Society. No one was aware that Cale Silver was in reality Shadrach, the leader of that evil group. No one was also aware of the plan that he had in the works. He gazed down at the map and a crystal that he had placed on the map, right on the country of Daventry. For a moment the crystal glowed a bright red before it became a clear red. Underneath, the land of Daventry now appeared a darker color. He knew what that meant. The first part of his plan was done. He opened the cloth pouch and placed the crystal into it. Once that was done, he heard movement in the room. He glanced back towards the bed and saw Manannan leap onto the bed. The cat that had once been a wizard sat down. Dahlia fell. It looks like the king used the magic shield, but I think an extra enchantment was put on it. Cale just smirked. The king is resourceful. All of his family is resourceful. We must remember that for the next phase. He then pulled out a crystal ball and placed it on the map over Kalima. The second he put it on the map, he could see everything in Kalima, and he brought up an image of a cave, and inside it. Then he saw Hagatha working over a cauldron. He figured the ogress was either working on a spell or cooking up a hapless victim. When he saw the brief glimpse of something in the cauldron, he decided to speak. "Agatha, do you know what day is approaching?" He smiled as Hagatha jumped, surprised that his voice was coming from all around her. "Brother Shadrach, I didn't expect you to be calling so soon. I heard that Dahlia had been revived, but I thought she would last longer." He laughed, knowing how it would sound in her cave. "She lasted as long as I figured she would. However, you are aware what day approaches within the next few weeks." He watched as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, the day that will allow the magical fortification spell to magnify our dark magic 100-fold. All we need is a magically born princess to be sacrificed. Believe it or not, Kalima has produced another one." He had already been aware of it. The only difference between this one and the one last time was that the father this time wasn't a member of the Black Cloak Society. This worked into his master plan. I am aware, and I want you to make preparations to get her to the quartz tower. If all goes well, what I expect to happen will improve things for the society." He then waved his hand, and the image of the cave disappeared. Kale quickly packed up the map and the crystal and placed them into a trunk. He then looked at Manannan. "Remain here, and stay out of sight. I will be back to continue my research for the counterspell." He then left the room. As he walked to the throne room, he knew one thing he would need for the counterspell would be the hair of the caster of the spell that made Manannan a cat. Once he had that, he could return Manannan to his human form. And Phase 3 would be ready to begin. Of course, before that began, he would have to have Phase 2 set in motion, which he would start in a few days' time. When he entered the throne room, he froze when he saw what was in there. He had expected the king to be thinking about Dahlia's defeat, and even the queen relieved to have survived. King Graham, however, wasn't sitting thinking, but engaged in a conversation with someone Kale didn't expect to see there. Standing in the throne room was King Alexander of the Green Isles, and the Jinn who had been in service to Abdul-Hazred, now serving the King of the Green Isles. Their appearance in Daventry meant one thing. Phase 2 had to start earlier than he had expected, but Phase 3 would soon be able to begin.